Pulling strings to build pyramids. No one knows exactly how the pyramids were built. Margaret Chow reckons the answer could be hanging in the air. The pyramids of Egypt were built more than 3,000 years ago, and no one knows how. The conventional picture is that tens of thousands of slaves dragged stone on sledges, but there's no evidence to back this up. Now, Californian software consultant called Maureen Clemens has suggested that kites might have been involved. While perusing a book on the monuments of Egypt, she noticed a hieroglyph that showed a row of men standing in odd postures. They were holding what looked like ropes that led via some kind of mechanical system to a giant bird in the sky. She wondered if perhaps the bird was actually a giant kite and the man was using it to lift a heavy object. Intrigued, Clemens contacted Motenda Garib, aeronautics professor at the California Institute of Technology. He was fascinated by the idea. Coming from Iran, I have a keen interest in the Middle East science. He says he too was puzzled by the picture that has sparked Clemens' interest. The object in the sky apparently had wings far too short and wide for a bird. The possibility certainly existed that it was a kite, he says, and since he needed a summer project for his student Emilio Graf, investigating the possibility of using kites as heavy lifters seemed like a good idea. Garib and Graf set themselves the task of raising a 45-meter stone column from horizontal to vertical, using no source of energy except the wind. Their initial calculations and scale model wind tunnel experiments could convinced them that they wouldn't need a strong wind to lift the 33.5-ton column. Even a modest force, if sustained over a long time, would do. The key was to use a pulley system that would magnify the applied force. So they rigged up a tent-shaped scaffold directly above the tip of the horizontal column, with pulleys suspended from the scaffold apex. The idea was that, as one end of the column rose, the base would roll across the ground on a trolley. Earlier this year, the team put Clemens' unlikely theory to the test. Using a 40-square mere rectangular nylon sail, the kites lifted the column clean off the ground. They were absolutely stunned, Garib said. The instant the sail opened into the wind, a huge force was generated, and the column was raised to the vertical in a mere 40 seconds. The wind was blowing at a gentle 16 to 20 kilometers an hour, little more than half what they thought would be needed. What they had failed to reckon with what would happen when the sky was opened. What they had failed to reckon with what was happened when the kite was opened. There was a huge initial force, 5 times larger than the state force. Garib says, this just meant that this kite could lift huge weights. Garib realized even a 300-stone column could have been lifted to the vertical with 40 or so men and 4 or 5 sails. So Clemens was right. The pyramid builders could have used kites to lift massive stones into place. Whether they actually did this is another matter, Garib says. There are no pictures showing the construction of the pyramids, so there's no way to tell what really happened. The evidence for using kites to move large stones is no better than worse than the evidence for the brute force method, Garib says. Indeed, the experiments have left many specialists unconvinced. The evidence for kite lifting is non-existent, say Willik Wendrich, an associate professor of Egyptology at the University of California, Los Angeles. Other fields, there's no more than a case for the theory. Harnessing the wind would not have been a problem for accomplished sailors like the Egyptians, and they are known to have used wooden pulleys, which could have been made strong enough to bear the weight of massive blocks of stone. In addition, there is some physical evidence that the